tier list videos. I could not tell you how many of them I watched. Now, sometimes they infuriate me because they do not like the equipment I happen to own, but most of the time I find it useful and interesting, at least entertaining if nothing else. And I thought, I want to do a tier list video as well. And I thought, well, what could I do a tier list video on? I'm not really an expert on microphones or compressors or any of that, but I realized I have owned I don't know how many guitars, over 20 guitars in my life. So I have a little bit of expertise, or at least experience with guitars. And I thought, I'm going to do a guitar list. Now, this isn't going to be a tier list so much in terms of ranking them. This is more like a tier list as a TEARS. There's been many tears that have been shed over the guitars that I've owned. So I'd like to do a guitar tiers list with you. And I want to start right away with my very first guitar, the very first guitar I owned. You know, you have to start there because after all, the first guitar is the special one, and mine was very special. And I'm going to just take it and I'm going to move it over here and put it, it is what it is. I bought that first guitar when I was 16 years old. I went to the local department store. It was Simpson's here in Canada. Then it became Sears, and I bought the floor model. I have no idea what make it was because the label that had been glued onto the headstock had fallen off. But I got that guitar. Okay, guitar, extra picks, extra set of strings, case, it was cheap vinyl case, but a case, a strap, and a book for $20. You can imagine the quality of that first guitar that I had. It was not great. I could not play an F chord. It didn't matter how I tried, and there was really nothing to set up on it either. But that was my first guitar, and that's what I learned to play on. I then made another choice which was really dumb. I traded the guitar for another guitar. I don't know why I did this. And this other guitar, I don't know if you can tell in there, appears to be bright orange. And it too was a no-name guitar. I have no idea what name it was. And I spray painted it bright orange. These two guitars were not great instruments. They certainly weren't great instruments in terms of tone or action, but they also weren't really necessarily great instruments to learn on. But I was persistent. I would sit in my bedroom 4 or 5 hours a day listening to the radio, trying to figure out songs, or using my CCR songbook, listening to records, whatever I could in order to learn how to play guitar and get better at it. My next guitar was my first electric guitar, and it was actually had a name on it. It was a Gaia-tone, and if I can find it here on my list, I will put it up here. Oh, there's the Gaia-tone, and it was a, we'll say it is what it is kind of guitar. I didn't actually buy the Gaia-tone. I used to do Heath kits. You'd make things like I did a shortwave receiver, a stereo amplifier, so on and so forth. I made all kinds of Heath kits. And one time when I was at the Heath kit store, I purchased, I can't remember whether it was an amp or it was something larger. They were giving away Gaia-tone guitars. If you made a major purchase at Heath kit, you got a free Gaia-tone electric guitar. How do you describe it? It was pure crap. It was a terrible guitar. I remember I took it to a party one time and it had a whammy bar on it, and some guy said, I can play, and he started playing on it, and he bent the whammy bar up so that it was now perpendicular to the rest of the guitar. It sounded terrible. It played terrible. It was an awful guitar. Now, I have to confess at this point, because obviously you're thinking, well, what amplifier did you use? I lied a little bit in that my first guitar was actually not this kind of brown, weird kind of guitar that I bought at Sears. My first guitar, and where am I going to put it? I suppose it was a good choice. My parents chose it. Was a lap steel guitar. When I was in, I think, grade 6 or something, the Ontario Conservatory of Music swept through our neighborhood and tested us all. And they said, well, I'm totally uncoordinated, so I can't learn piano or accordion or, Spanish-style guitar, as they called it. But I could learn lap steel, or what they called Hawaiian guitar, because all you did was hold a bar of metal and slide it along while you finger picked. And so I did that, I think, for 3 or 4 years I took lessons. I even somewhere have my bronze medals from competitions. I was not a great guitarist, but of course, if you're going to buy an electric lap steel guitar, you have to have an amplifier. And this was the amplifier. Now, this one's the exact same model, but mine was all black. It didn't have that kind of weird, I can't even call it tweed. Anyways, it was exactly this National amp, 5-watt amp, one control on it. It was a volume control with a switch. So you turned the volume control, it turned on the amp, and it served a purpose. It had a 8-inch Jensen speaker. And that's what I used with my Gaiatone guitar. Played that for years and years. And eventually I gave the amp to a friend and sold the lap steel. So they're both long gone. But that's how I was able to listen to the Gaiatone, though I'm not really sure it was worth listening to. I finally got my first real guitar down at Whaley and Royce. There was a guitar shop on Yonge Street in Toronto called Whaley and Royce, and I bought an FG, I'm going to put it in here. Okay, a Yamaha FG 230K. I remember the model because I'd tell people I had a Yamaha FG 230K, and they thought I owned a motorcycle. And I said, no. It's a 12-string guitar. Now, when I say that this was my next guitar, it was actually my next one, and my next one, and my next one, and my next one. So I got the 12-string, and at this time, I was helping lead singing at a church youth group, and I thought a 12-string would be great sound. It would be really good because I was accompanying the song leader at the time. I thought, 12-string would be a great guitar. So I bought this 12-string. I tuned it up to concert pitch, and within a month or two, the neck started to go. So I took it back to Whaley and Royce, and they gave me my second Yamaha, another brand new Yamaha. I tuned it up to concert pitch because I really wanted the full fretboard, okay? So I tuned it up to concert pitch, and its neck went. So I took that one back to Whaley and Royce, and at that point they gave me, I don't know whether it was a used or rebuilt or returned or whatever. Anyways, it wasn't new Yamaha 12-string. Now I'm on my third one, and you can guess what happened. Yes. So I took the third one back. They handed me a brand new fourth one. I handed it back to them, and I said, how much for the return? If I just give it back to you. And they said, well, the full price, it's full value. It's a brand new guitar. It's not even left the shop. So I went looking around through their inventory to find my next guitar. And this was one of the lessons learned in life. They had an Ovation, and I'm going to put in what was I thinking. It was a used Ovation. I believe it was the Glenn Campbell model. It had somebody's signature in gold on the headstock, and that it was ebony. It was gorgeous. It had a shallow body, and it was spectacular. But I bought it out of desperation, and I bought it in spite of. The in spite of was the fact that it was a terrible playing guitar. It was so tight, you couldn't bend strings. The action was awful on it. They tried adjusting it. There seemed to be nothing you could do to adjust this Ovation guitar. On top of that, I had a horrible tragedy. I couldn't afford a case for it, so I made one. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyways, a big, huge, it was more like a coffin. It was plywood top and bottom, 1-inch wood all the way around, kind of wedge-shaped. And I only put one latch on it. I don't know what I was thinking. And one day we'd finished playing and we were up on a stage, and I had put the guitar in the case on the stage, and I pulled it off the stage. The latch released, the guitar fell down, and it broke off one of those cute little knobby things on the headstock. Oh, that was so painful. I took it to a luthier who did what he could do to fix it up, but after that it did not look the same because it was missing part of one of those little things. That guitar was a really bad decision, and it taught me two things. One is that do not buy a guitar on impulse or out of desperation or whatever. Oh, I didn't learn that lesson. We're about to find out. Anyways, I did later. And the other is never buy a guitar that you don't spend some time playing first. You know, what's the action like? What's the sound like? Does it inspire you, or is it a challenge to play? And I didn't quite learn that lesson either, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the next instrument I bought was an Epiphone. And it's going to go, what was I thinking? Now you're thinking to yourself, hold on a second, you know, Epiphone is a reasonably well-known guitar. But back in this would have been 1970s, late 1970s, and they weren't necessarily a very well-made guitar. In fact, 13 months after I bought it, in other words, 1 month after the warranty expired, the neck decided it no longer needed to be attached to the body. Yes, it started to pull out of the body of the guitar, and nobody would honor the warranty because it was expired. So I took it to a violin maker, repair guy in the community. I thought, well, this guy will know what he's doing. I should have maybe been a little leery since he probably, I think, made most of his living as a barber, but he had this violin repair shop and everything. So I took it to him, and he did reattach the neck, but now I had 4 screws on either side of the fingerboard right through the soundboard holding the neck in place. Not great. Not great. So the Epiphone was, I did not love it at all. It played all right, but, when you got 4 screws stuck through the soundboard, it just isn't the same. The next guitar, well, let me set you up. Okay, so I had a friend he actually liked my Epiphone. Anyways, he said, hey, I want to go buy a guitar. Let's go down to Long and McQuaid. And back then it was at Bloor and Spadina here in Toronto. And we went down to Long and McQuaid, and he started looking at guitars, and I thought, well, if he's looking, I'm going to look at guitars as well. And at that time, I was starting to think that I'd like to learn classical guitar. When I played lap steel, of course, I learned how to finger pick. Mind you, we used picks on our fingers with the lap steel, but I thought, okay, maybe I'd like to do classical. So I was playing around with this classical guitar, and my friend, he said, hey, tell you what, I will buy your Epiphone off of you, and you can buy this classical guitar. So I bought a Hashimoto, and this again is another what was I thinking guitar. So I got the Hashimoto home, and there was 3 problems with it. Now, I should explain, partly I was influenced to buy it because there was a Christian performer named Larry Norman who I really enjoyed, got to meet him a few times, and he had a nylon string guitar, and I thought, hey, yeah, this guy really making it sound great. The problem with the classical guitar is I have small hands, okay, and it has a wider neck, and I was struggling with it. On top of that, I wasn't feeling inspired. In fact, basically the Hashimoto just sat. I didn't play for months. It became a discouragement, which I guess goes back to I should have really thought this through kind of situation. So I had the Hashimoto, and it was just sitting around, and life was not great. At that same time, and I'd been in a series of Christian bands, okay, so I'd been out of it for a little bit, And then I had a friend who belonged one, and he said, hey, we really need a guitarist. So I arrived with my Hashimoto, which I should say by this point in time, I played mainly lead, and lead on a classical guitar, unless you're spectacular, it just didn't have the same sound. There was a person there who was did the tech side of it, and he was a shop teacher, and he said, I've got this old hollow body electric that if we redid it, fixed it up and everything, I think it'd be perfect for you. And so I would go to his place. He had a basic wood shop. You can imagine a shop teacher, what he had in his basement. And we rebuilt this guitar, and I'm going to say good choice. Almost I want it back. I gave it to a good friend of mine. So there's part of me, but I'm going to put it in good choice. This is a Roy Schmeck harmony guitar. Now, there's a whole bunch of Roy Schmeck harmony guitars. Roy Schmeck, if you look him up, was the guy who basically, and I know this will be controversial, invented the guitar solo. Okay, and he was a real whiz on a guitar, and this was one of his signature models. You can't see it here, but his name is actually script signature in aluminum right on the top bout of the guitar. Now, mine it started off as red, but the finish was really bad shape. We ended up refinishing it in black. Also, this one has slightly different pickups. The pickups I had were Diarmans, and they had kind of gold underneath the silver. It looked really sharp, and it was a great sounding guitar. The only complaint with it was Roy Schmeck liked large neck guitars. So there was no way this neck was ever going to warp. But also, unlike my Yamaha 12-string, but also I could barely get my fingers around it. But I had that guitar for years and years until I gave it, along with the National amp, to a friend of mine. And it really kind of took me out of that funk with the Hashimoto. I don't even know what happened to the Hashimoto, whether I gave it away or I traded it in or sold it, or I think I had such a bad experience with that guitar that I have suppressed it in my mind. But anyways, the Roy Schmeck really made a big difference. And I, of course, had the National amp to use with it, and I toured around with this band quite a bit, and it really went well. At this point, basically, I have the Hashimoto Classical as an acoustic guitar that I'm not enjoying, and this electric, and I thought, I got to get another acoustic guitar, because that was really where my roots were and my heart was. And I picked up, and this was, you know what, I'm going to put it, this will be weird, people are not going to understand this. I want it back. That is a Norman B20. And it defied the odds. Back then, the Norman B20 had a bolt-on neck, and it was bolted on like an electric guitar neck. It didn't have a heel at all. The body, I believe, was birch, and the top, while it was spruce, was actually spruce plywood. Now, they probably didn't call it plywood because that doesn't sound good. But it sounded great, and it played great. It was set up by the store. They had a repair person there who would come in, and he knew how to set up guitars really well. And I had that for years. I installed a Shure microphone in it with a jack so that I could plug it in, because I gigged with it a lot. Really loved that guitar. I ended up trading it, and we'll get to that in a moment. But if there was a guitar that I'd want back, it said Norman B20. It was a great guitar. I love Norman guitars. I really do. And this one, I'm sure, maybe sounded exceptionally good, given the fact that it was basically plywood top guitar. But that was great. I was really enjoying playing electric, and the Roy Schmeck, as I said, had a really thick neck, and I thought, I need a serious electric guitar. And I remember, I am now a Strat owner, But this is back in the late 70s. And I remember sitting in a guitar store playing a Strat one time. I'm sitting there in the front window. I got the Strat, and I'm thinking to myself, what a piece of garbage this guitar is. And in front of me is this like 16-year-old kid staring at me. You know, it makes you really feel self-conscious. And he says, "Great guitar, eh?" And I'm thinking to myself, no. So I asked him, you know, "Why do you say that?" He says, "Oh, I've got one." "Oh, great, yeah." And then he proceeds to tell me how he basically replaced everything on the guitar. And I thought, I do not want to buy a guitar that I then have to replace everything on it in order to make it the guitar I want. That makes absolutely no sense. So my dream of owning a Strat, at least back then, was dashed. But the store I was at, I think, was the sole Canadian distributor of Dean guitars. And this is back when the Dean guitars were being made in Chicago. And they were just amazing guitars. Not cheap back then either. I think we're talking like close to $1,000 in late 1970s for a guitar. But I got a Dean, a light, and it is a I cannot begin to describe the sound and the tone and the sustain. It was amazing. So it was a Dean Light Cherry Burst. I had them install a little switch on it because the two pickups, when you had them both engaged, they were wired out of phase with each other, which was really cool because you got this great waka waka sound. But there were sometimes when you just wanted the full force, and so I had them install a switch so I could reverse that phase again so that they'd be in phase. It was an amazing guitar. I remember playing that in the store and getting ready to buy it, and somebody was there who owned one, and he said, "Just wait, there'll be a day when you're playing this guitar and all of a sudden it's going to open up and you'll be amazed." And it was. I was at a gig, we were playing in the open square at Square One on a stage with a fountain right behind us. That was a little scary. And all of a sudden, the tone and the resonance, it just bloomed right in the middle of a song. It was phenomenal. Of course, I couldn't use my little National amp with it, so at the same time, I went out and did a what was I thinking purchase. I bought a Fender Super Reverb. I figured, hey, might as well have the biggest amp you can afford. Every guitar I plugged into that amp sounded exactly the same. That I know that that's a terrible thing to say, and I'm sure it isn't true, but to me it sounded like whether I plugged in the Dean or the Roy Schmeck or another guitar that'll be coming up to in a minute, they seem to just sound the same to me. On top of that, that amplifier weighed 2 million pounds, and that is not an exaggeration. You can't, this one, I chose this particular picture off the internet because it's on wheels. I installed wheels on it because it was miserable. And I was living for a while downtown Toronto in a basement with 10 million steep steps, and hauling that amp up those steps was a nightmare to the point where I decided I had to get rid of it. And I did. I went totally the other way. I went, and this is I Want Back amp, actually. I got a Roland Bolt 30. Nowhere near the power, nowhere near the size, but it was a great amp, FET front end, so it had a solid state preamp in it, but it was a tube output. And it was so versatile. It had so many options. I looked them up. They are a great amplifier. So I got that. I got rid of the Fender Super Reverb, and I picked up the Roland Bolt 30. Really loved that amp. It was a great amplifier. At the same time that I did all this, I picked up my dream guitar, and one of my greatest regrets in life now, I picked up a Gibson Cherry Dot ES335. It's probably late 60s, I think it was, a vintage late 60s. It wasn't stock. The person, I bought it used at a guitar store, and they explained to me that the previous owner, he had replaced the bridge pickup with one that he could split the coil on. So he replaced the bridge pickup, and he also put a switch in so that he could do a single coil or double coil. It was so versatile. It played so well. It was an amazing guitar, and it is one of my greatest regrets, because about this time, I'd been married, my wife was pregnant, and we bought a house. She wasn't working now, and I was feeling cash strapped. This is probably the low point in my guitar life. I wasn't playing in a band at this point. I didn't know whether there was going to be any future for me playing with anybody. And I decided we needed money. So I took the Gibson ES 335 and the Roland Bolt 30, and I took them to local guitar store and put them in there on consignment because I needed the money desperately. What happened next is one of the great tragedies in life. The store went bankrupt and closed. They had sold the guitar and the amp and then went bankrupt. And there I was. I didn't have the guitar and amp, and I didn't have the money either that I so desperately thought I needed. So I had nothing. Fortunately, and this is a big shout out, and one of the great tragedies this past year is Cosmo Music closed. Cosmo Music took over the inventory and everything of that store that went bankrupt. They contacted me and said, "We don't have the money, but we will give you in kind for the guitar and the amp." I will get to what the in-kind was in a moment, but I didn't entirely lose out, because somewhere in the midst of this, I also decided to get rid of my Dean, a light. And so I gave it to someone who was going to put it in a store in London. They said it'll sell well in London. And somehow or another, it ended up in a pawn shop in St. Thomas, and they were renting it out. And by the time I caught up with that guitar, it was in horrible shape. It was beaten up from being rented out. And I needed to do something. You know, they didn't really want to buy it. So I looked around the store to see what they had in their inventory, and I thought, well, maybe I could trade something, for it. And I'm going to put this in, I'm going to put it in Good Choice. It's kind of like between the two, and maybe for some people it would be part of the Lust. It's a Martin D1235, so it's a D35 12-string guitar, and they designated D12-35. It was hanging in this pawn shop in St. Thomas. It was in rough shape, to put it mildly. Somebody had refinished the front of it with a opaque honey-colored finish. It was gooped on, so you couldn't even see the grain anymore. The neck, they don't have, this is from, by the way, from the 1960s, so it's Brazilian rosewood, okay? Sitka spruce top. And they didn't put truss rods in the necks then. They just had a really thick neck, which we'll get to in a moment. And it needed a neck reset. But when you strummed it, the voice of 1,000 angels, it was the most gorgeous sounding guitar I'd ever heard in my life. It was amazing. Now, they wouldn't do a straight trade for the Dean, but I also happened to have my Norman with me at the time. And so I traded straight up the Dean and the Norman for the Martin D1235. I then took it to a guy here in Toronto. I don't know if Brian Mascarin still services guitars or not. He made and serviced guitars. Amazing, just amazing guy. He reset the neck, stripped off the horrible whatever that finish was and refinished it. And it played wonderful. The action was great, except, again, tree trunk thick neck, which was a little discouraging. I just found I could play open chords and, half chords and stuff on it, but it was really thick. It was kind of almost a, what was I thinking purchase, except that by this point now, of course, it's worth more than that beat-up Dean and the Norman ever were worth. So I at least had an investment, if you know what I mean. So I had that Martin D1235. It also, though, meant that I needed a six-string. And there used to be a guitar shop up in Brampton. I can't remember the name of the shop now. It's long gone. And they had a Midnight Madness sale. Now, if you've never been to a Midnight Madness sale, I got there around 11 p.m. and it was filled with like 16-year-olds playing loud electric guitars. Basically, probably not there to buy anything, but and then I arrive, a guy in his 40s, and immediately the staff zeroed in on me. They thought he might actually be here to buy something. Said, I'm looking for an acoustic guitar. And I wanted something. Ooh, the camera just died. Okay, so we're going to pause for a moment here. Okay, not sure why the camera stopped, but it's still rolling, so we'll keep going. Anyways, I'm at this Midnight Madness sale. I said to the salesman, I'm looking for something, and I wanted something a little special. I had a lot of guitars, like no-name ones or whatever, and I wanted an acoustic that was a little special. There was an old Guild D20 hanging there. Let me pull this out. And I'm going to put this on. I want it back only because it carries a lot of meaning for me. It was beaten up, gouged and gashed and scratched and scraped and finished off. It reeked of cigarette smoke. And it also had a thick neck, what can I say? But I strummed the thing. Oh, heaven. And this is a mahogany top guitar. Okay, it's all mahogany. But the tone and the sound, it was gorgeous. And I played it for a little bit. I don't know. So I grabbed a few others. And by this point, the salesman's thinking, I think this guy might actually buy something tonight. So he opened up one of the classrooms so that I could go and play without the screaming electric lead from 16-year-olds who could play better than me. And I kept trying other guitars, and I kept coming back to the Guild. Finally, the salesman, he grabbed a guitar, and we jammed. And I jammed with this Guild, and I knew I had to buy it. Even though it was ugly as sin, even though the neck was a little bit too big for me, it just sounded too good. And I got to confess my bias, it was a Guild. And I was going to have a Guild. And it sounds good. I had that guitar, of all my acoustics, I think the longest of any guitar. And I loved that guitar. And it sounded so good. And I played it a lot. And I gigged with it a lot. It was an amazing guitar. And you're wondering, okay, why am I talking about the past tense? I'll get to that in a moment. But anyways, I had the Guild. And I was really pleased with it and had it for many years. Of course, by now, just about everything else is gone. And by this point now, I'm playing regularly in a church band. In fact, I played 12 years basically every Sunday with this band. And I had mentioned earlier that I really had gotten into playing lead and really enjoyed it. And I thought, I need a good electric guitar. And I decided I wanted a Strat. I'm a Clapton fan, what can I say? I wanted a Stratocaster. And I started looking, and I discovered a couple of things about Strats. One is every one of them sounds different. I went to every guitar shop in Toronto and played Strats, new and used, and was absolutely amazed at how different they all sounded. And I thought, okay, I need to have some kind of control here. And I realized that my Roland, and I should put this up here, because by this point I'd purchased a Roland amplifier. In fact, I'm not sure where I purchased it. Somewhere in here, I still have it. I'm going to put it there. It's just a Roland Cube 15, and it was the replacement after, of course, I got rid of the National and the Bolt and the Super Reverb, and the Roland just wasn't going to cut it with a Strat. And so I needed to make a decision, and at that time, the Blues Junior had just come out. And I played it, and there was the next model up, the Blues Deluxe or something like that. And it was 40 watts, and it was too much for the church I was playing in. So I settled for the Blues Junior, and I purchased that, and I still have it, and it was a good choice. So it's the first year. They were the ones made in the States with a green board in them, and people will say, well, number 4, number 3, and number 2 are all better. But I love this amp. I think it's just a great sounding amp. That became my control. So everywhere I went to try out a Strat, I also played it through a Blues Junior so that I had this kind of idea of what the Strat sounded like. I ended up buying the Strat. It's a 92. And this looks much like it. In fact, I've got the same case for it that this one is. And I bought it and the amp together, and I got them at the guitar shop in Port Credit, which doesn't exist anymore. But they're an amazing combination together. They just sound so good together. And I still have the Strat. It's out of all of these, I think, the only one I have left. Yep, everything else is gone. And so I got the Strat, and I had the Guild. So I had an acoustic and an electric, and I had a nice amp. Well, 2 amps, but the Blues Junior especially. So since then, and I'm not going to feature any of these, but I decided to start building guitars. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guitars here, which actually one of them's a bass and one's a travel guitar. Oh, plus one other that I didn't build. And so I built a whole bunch of guitars. This is Zoe. I've featured her in a video. I'll try and remember to put a link. So all the other guitars I have now are guitars I built rather than bought. So out of all of these guitars that I have up here, I only have one of them, and that's the Strat. Now, I couldn't do a discussion about guitars without talking about what I'd love to get. And I put Need or Lust up here, but quite frankly, I don't need any of these guitars I'm going to feature. So let's be honest, it's all about lust. So my favorite looking guitar, and people are going to go, what? If for me, there's the perfect looking guitar, perfect shape, the one that calls out to me, it's got to be a Telly. And of course, it's got to be a blonde Telly with a maple neck. I've rented Tellys. I've played a lot, but I've never owned one. And of all these that I'm going to feature here, I think it's the one that I may actually one day buy because I really like Tellys. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with them. I think it's, and I know this is controversial, I think it's the perfect looking guitar. And like Strats, everyone you play sounds different. And that's where my challenges become, because a lot of the Tellys I played, I don't like that chicken picking kind of sound out of them. I want something a little meatier. And I know you can get a Telly that has a lot of soul to it. So that would be the first one. Now, going totally crazy, in order to get the money to get my Strat and amp, I was able to take my Martin to Songbird and put it in on consignment. They eventually sold it, and that gave me enough money to buy the Strat and the amp. But while I was in that store, one day there was a George Benson, Ibanez George Benson guitar in there, and I played it, but they wouldn't do a straight trade. Wow, what a great sounding and playing instrument. If I could have a George Benson Ibanez, I would. Amazing guitar. Okay, might as well continue with the electrics. Gretsch. Sometime I'll post a video about Techies. She's one of my guitars, and she's kind of modeled after a Gretsch. She's got the Bigsby. She has a Filtron at the bridge, and kind of a semi-hollow body guitar. And I chose this, but I know most people would say, well, it's got to be the Falcon or the Penguin or something. Those are the iconic Gretsches. I chose this one because it's orange. And I know that isn't a good reason to choose a guitar, but I love the sound of Filtrons. I love what a Gretsch does, and I'd like to have one. It'd be a great guitar. Two acoustics. Okay, I'm gonna end with my Super Dream guitar, and I'm gonna go with this. A Martin HD 35. I've always liked the 35. And I hate to say this, but the reason I like the 35 is the reason why I built Zoe with a three-piece back. Love the three-piece back. Just think it's so cool. Also, they are tuned slightly different. They carve the bracing a little bit differently, so it has a slightly different sound. And the HD, because I love herringbone. I did a terrible job, but Zoe has herringbone pattern on her as well. So Martin, I've always wanted a, well, I can't say I always wanted a Martin. I had one, D1235, but a Martin 6-string, let's say. And then my absolute dream guitar. When I was in buying that Hashimoto at Long & McQuaid back in the 70s, they had some Laravees hanging there. And this is back when Jean-Paul and Wren and Manzer, all these people were building guitars in Toronto, handmade guitars. And there were Laravees hanging there, and they were over $1,000, you know. I mean, now they're way more, but I would want a Laravee, a fancy Laravee. Now, you could take this list, maybe not the Telly, but you could take this list and say these guitars are wasted on me as a guitar player, but that would be my dream, would be to have a Laravee. So this has been my journey from my no-name guitar where the label fell off to my next no-name guitar to finally owning some good guitars like the Guild, the Strat, and it's been a cool journey. I've enjoyed all the instruments I've owned and the ones I have now and play. I hope you enjoyed this tiers list, because there were a lot of tiers with this. You can see there's a lot of what was I thinking, and it is what it is on my list, as well as some that I think were a good choice, and ones that I would want back. So thank you for hanging in there to the end. I think probably I'll put something with a link maybe to Zoe or whatever and subscribe. And thank you so much for hanging in there with me. Bye-bye.